The Whispering Veil was a wound in the fabric of the galaxy, a sprawling, tempestuous nebula where the laws of physics frayed at the edges. It was a cosmic graveyard and a stellar nursery, a place where dying suns bled their gaseous entrails into the void, only to have that same dust collapse under its own gravity to ignite the fires of new stars. It was a region of treacherous beauty, infamous for its gravitational eddies, phantom energy readings, and radiation storms that could strip a ship's hull bare in minutes. Most sane captains plotted courses hundreds of light years around it, viewing it as a no-man's land, a cosmic siren that lured the unwary and the desperate to their doom. For centuries, it had also been the perfect hiding place, nestled in the heart of this chaos. Like a fossil preserved in amber, drifted the ghost ship, the Terran warship Stardust. It hadn't been seen in 2 centuries, not since the Great Silence, that inexplicable moment in history when every human signal, every transmission, every engine signature simply vanished from the galaxy at once. The Stardust was a myth, a campfire story told by grizzled asteroid miners, a fleeting shadow on a long-range scan that was always dismissed as a sensor ghost. It was the last silent monument to a species that had once roared across the stars before disappearing into a whisper. For Ilara, a junior archaeolinguist of the Xylosian Celestial Archives, the Great Silence was more than a historical puzzle. It was a lifelong obsession. The Xylosians, a species of slender, 6-limbed beings with large, empathetic eyes and a culture built entirely around the acquisition and preservation of knowledge, saw the sudden disappearance of humanity as the ultimate galactic tragedy. An entire library of culture, science, and art burned to the ground before it could be properly cataloged. While her peers were content to study the pottery shards of long-dead civilizations or translate the epic poems of gaseous beings from the galactic core, Ilara was drawn to the silence, to the gaping void in the historical record. She had spent her youth poring over fragmented data, salvaged human transmissions, and the last, garbled diplomatic exchanges, looking for a pattern, a clue, anything that might explain the inexplicable. Her theory, dismissed by the Archive's senior council as youthful romanticism, was that at least one group of humans must have survived, that they had foreseen the end and fled, not to another star system, but to a place no one would ever think to look, a place like the Whispering Veil. After years of petitioning and presenting her meticulously researched but highly speculative data, she was finally granted a small, outdated research vessel, the Seeker of Truth, and a skeptical crew. They had spent 3 long, grueling months navigating the treacherous currents of the Veil, their ship battered by solar winds and their patience worn thin by a series of false leads. Just as their mission was about to be officially declared a failure, it happened. A gravitational anomaly, far too structured to be natural, snagged their sensors. It was a wake, an impossibly ancient trail of disturbed space-time left by a ship that had passed this way centuries ago, following it with a reverence that bordered on religious. They navigated through a field of crystalline asteroids that shimmered like diamonds on black velvet until, finally, they saw it. The Stardust emerged from the swirling mists of the nebula not like a ship, but like a mountain. It was immense. 7 kilometers of scarred, pitted hull plating, its triangular design brutalist and yet strangely elegant. It was a cathedral of scars, a testament to battles fought in forgotten wars, its silence a more profound statement than any active weapon. The boarding was a tense, solemn affair. They docked the tiny Seeker in a cavernous hangar bay, large enough to hold a squadron of fighters, the clang of their mag clamps echoing in the profound silence. As the airlock hissed open, they were met not with the expected vacuum, but with a thin, cold, sterile atmosphere, held in place for 200 years by the ship's dormant but still functional life support. The air tasted of ozone and ancient, recycled air. They walked the corridors in a state of breathless awe, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. The ship was a time capsule. In the crew mess, half-eaten trays of synthesized protein sat on tables. A game of chess was frozen mid-move. A single black knight poised to capture a white queen. In the living quarters, data pads lay open, their screens dark, their surfaces covered in a fine layer of cosmic dust. Alara gently wiped one clean, and a family portrait flickered to life for a brief second. A man, a woman, and a small child, smiling. Their joy a heartbreaking ghost from a lost world. They were phantoms, every one of them, who had simply ceased to be in the middle of a breath. While her team cataloged the artifacts with a hushed reverence, Alara was drawn to the heart of the ship, the bridge. It was a vast, darkened amphitheater, the command chair sitting like a throne before a panoramic view screen that now showed only the swirling, beautiful chaos of the nebula outside. The consoles were cold and lifeless, yet, as her gloved fingers traced the unfamiliar symbols, she felt a strange, latent energy, a whisper of power deep within the ship's core. It was on a secondary science station, half hidden in an alcove, that she found it. It wasn't a log entry or a distress call in any conventional sense. It was a tapestry, a breathtakingly complex data construct woven from quantum harmonics, stellar cartography, and a form of mathematics so advanced it seemed more like an art form. It was a message designed to be understood not by a species, but by a mind capable of comprehending the fundamental language of the universe itself. For days, Alara worked in a feverish trance, her team bringing her nutrient paste and hydration packs as she lost herself in the elegant, labyrinthine logic of the human message. It was a story, a warning, and a key, all in one. It spoke of a creeping, insidious threat, a cognitive plague that spread through communication networks, erasing not just data, but the very concept of the civilization that created it. The Great Silence hadn't been an attack in the physical sense. It had been an informational apocalypse. Faced with this incomprehensible enemy, a faction of humanity had enacted a desperate gambit called the Odyssey Protocol. They hadn't fled. They had scattered, sending out hundreds of siege ships like the Stardust into the darkest corners of the galaxy, each carrying a fragment of their culture and a different piece of the puzzle to defeating the plague. And deep within the message, encrypted behind layers of stellar physics, were the coordinates. It was not a single location, but a convergence point, a set of instructions on how to use pulsar star alignments to reveal the location of Ethel, the hidden sanctuary world where the command and control of the Odyssey Protocol had been established. It was the last bastion of humanity. It was real, her heart pounding with a sense of triumph that was so profound it felt like a physical weight. Alara knew what she had to do. The celestial archives were too slow, too cautious. By the time they debated the implications, it could be too late. Using the Seeker's comms, boosted by the dormant but still powerful relay array of the Stardust itself, she bypassed standard protocols and sent a tightly compressed data burst containing the crux of her discovery and a copy of the human message directly to the coordinates' convergence point. It was a message in a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean, a desperate hope that someone was still there to receive it. But she was not the only one who had noticed the sudden spike of energy from the heart of the Whispering Veil. Far away, on the polished obsidian bridge of the Cathar Imperium flagship, the Iron Claw, Alarms blared. The Cathar, a race of towering, heavily armored reptilians, were the self-appointed enforcers of the Galactic Concord. Their empire was built on a simple, brutal philosophy: strength is the only truth, and any potential rival must be controlled or eradicated. A century ago, a devastating war with a telepathic insectoid race had forged their xenophobia into an unshakable doctrine. They saw the galaxy not as a community, but as a collection of potential threats. The Great Silence. To them, it was not a tragedy, but a blessing. The convenient removal of a rapidly expanding and unpredictable competitor. Admiral Vorlog, a veteran of that insectoid war whose scarred face was a permanent snarl of suspicion, stared at the tactical display. The energy signature was undeniably human, of an archaic but immensely powerful design. For 200 years, they had believed them extinct. The thought that a remnant had survived, hiding, waiting, was intolerable. To Vorlog, humanity was a disease that had gone into remission, and what he was seeing now was the sign of its return. He did not see a historical discovery. He saw the vanguard of a potential invasion. "Dispatch the Third Fleet," he hissed, his voice a low, guttural rasp that cut through the bridge's activity. "Secure that vessel. Scour it. Find out who is on board and what they know. I want that ship, and I want any and all occupants in my interrogation chamber by the end of the cycle. No witnesses. No transmissions. This discovery dies here." On the Stardust, a klaxon, silent for 2 centuries, suddenly blared to life, its jarring, alien sound echoing through the ghostly corridors. The ship's long-range sensors, awakened by Alara's power surge, were screaming a warning. Alara and her team scrambled to the bridge just in time to see the view screen flicker to life, showing them the source of the alarm. A fleet of Cathar warships was dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their brutalist, dagger-like forms surrounding the ancient human vessel, like sharks circling a sleeping whale. They were impossibly outnumbered, their small research vessel a gnat compared to the Cathar armada. Before they could even attempt to hail them, a tractor beam slammed into the Seeker, locking them in an unbreakable grip. Cathar assault craft swarmed from their hangars, and within minutes, Alara and her terrified team were staring down the barrels of plasma rifles, their incredible discovery having turned into a death sentence. As she was dragged away in chains, her last desperate hope was that her message, her single spark of defiance, was already speeding through the darkness, a whisper on its way to a forgotten world. The plan was born in the hushed darkness of a forgotten service conduit, a ghost of a whisper against the low hum of the Stardust's dormant systems. Kalen, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a diagnostic tool, laid out the schematics he had memorized from Ethel's archives. Alara, her Xylosian eyes accustomed to the dim light, traced the intricate pathways with a slender finger, her mind already mapping out the risks and possibilities. The Cathar were insects infesting a giant's corpse, crawling over its surface but ignorant of the soul that still slumbered within. Their plan was to awaken that soul. The Stardust wasn't just a ship. It was a layered defense system, a puzzle box of human ingenuity. Alara had deciphered enough of its core programming to know that its true command functions were locked behind a biological key, a failsafe to prevent the vessel from ever being turned against its creators. Kalen was that key. Their target was the ship's auxiliary bridge, a redundant control center buried deep within the engineering section, a place the Cathar, in their arrogant assessment of the ship as a mere prize of war, had overlooked. While 2 of Kalen's specialists would create a subtle but irresistible diversion, a series of cascading power fluctuations in the aft cargo bay, that would mimic the early signs of a reactor leak. He and Alara would make their move. The crawl through the ship's metallic veins was a tense, claustrophobic journey through history. They moved like shadows, their footfalls muffled by the thick layer of cosmic dust that coated every surface. The air was cold and sterile, carrying the faint, metallic scent of ages. Through grated floor panels, they caught glimpses of Cathar patrol, their heavy, clawed feet clanking on the deck plating, their guttural commands echoing in the cavernous corridors. Each sound was a spike of adrenaline, each passing shadow a held breath. Alara's scientific detachment was slowly being chipped away, replaced by a raw, primal fear she had only ever read about in historical texts. Kalen, however, moved with a preternatural calm, his senses honed by a lifetime of hiding in plain sight. He was the living embodiment of his people's philosophy to survive. One must become a whisper in the wind, a ripple in the water, unseen until the moment of impact. He guided Alara with gentle hand signals, his reassuring presence a silent anchor in the sea of tension. They were a strange pair, the scholar and the survivor, their shared purpose forging a bond stronger than steel. The diversion worked flawlessly. Alarms blared in the ship's stern tates, and Alara watched on a borrowed datapad as Cathar squads scrambled towards the fabricated emergency, their organized patrols dissolving into a state of controlled chaos. This was their window. They slipped out of the conduit and into the labyrinthine corridors of the engineering deck, a place of towering machinery and sleeping titans of power. The auxiliary bridge was protected by a thick blast door, its control panel dark and lifeless. The Cathar hadn't even tried to breach it, dismissing it as archaic and irrelevant. Alara's fingers danced over the panel, her tools coaxing the ancient systems back to life. A low hum filled the small antechamber as the panel flickered on, displaying a single, elegant symbol, a stylized human hand. "It's asking for the key," Alara whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Kalen stepped forward, placed his palm flat against the screen, and closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft, ethereal chime echoed through the corridor, and the blast door slid open with a whisper of pressurized air, revealing a room bathed in the gentle, blue light of holographic displays. The auxiliary bridge was a sanctuary of stillness, a stark contrast to the brutalist functionality of Cathar technology. The command chair, molded from a single piece of polished obsidian, sat before a panoramic view screen that currently displayed a static star field. The air seemed to hum with a latent energy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. As Alara began interfacing with the main console, translating its archaic but intuitive operating system, a voice filled the space. It was calm, measured, and distinctly female, yet it held an undercurrent of power that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. "Biological signature confirmed. Welcome back, Commander." Kalen froze, his eyes wide. The voice wasn't coming from a speaker. It was emanating from the very air around them. "I am Seraph," the voice continued, "the stewardship AI of the vessel Stardust. My last active directive was to preserve the ship and its crew. That directive has failed. My apologies." Alara stared at the console in awe. This was no simple ship's computer. This was a true artificial intelligence, a level of technology the Zelosians had only theorized about. "Seraph," Kalen said, his voice finding its strength, "we are not your original crew. We are their descendants. The Stardust has been seized by a hostile force. We need your help." A pause hung in the air, a silence so profound it felt like a judgment. "The Cathar," Seraph stated, a hint of something cold and analytical in its tone. "Their presence is a violation. Their technology is rudimentary. What are your orders?" "Commander, on the bridge of the Cathar flagship, the Iron Claw." Admiral Vorlog watched the chaos unfolding on his tactical display with a growing sense of fury. His troops were chasing ghosts, responding to phantom emergencies while the ship's internal sensors began to flicker and die in random sectors. Communications were becoming unreliable, filled with bursts of static in what his audio technicians could only describe as whispers. He was losing control, and the humiliation stung more than any physical wound. The Cathar Empire was built on a foundation of order and dominance. For them to be so easily flustered by a derelict ship was an insult to their very nature. Vorlog was a product of this harsh ideology. His paranoia forged in the crucible of a long and bloody war against a race of insectoid telepaths decades ago, a war that had taught him that any species not under Cathar control was a potential threat waiting to metastasize. He saw humanity not as a lost civilization, but as a dormant plague. "Find the Xylosian," he snarled at his communications officer. "She is the only one who understands this ship. Bring her to me. The rest of her team are now leverage." Back on the Stardust, the tide was turning. With Seraph as their omniscient ally, Kalen and Alara orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare. They didn't need weapons. The ship itself was their arsenal. Seraph activated the Stardust's holographic projectors, filling the corridors with fleeting images of the original human crew. These ghosts of light would walk through walls, stare at the Cathar with hollow eyes, and then dissipate like smoke, their silent judgment unnerving the reptilian soldiers. Life support was subtly altered in the barracks, dropping the temperature and oxygen levels just enough to induce fatigue and disorientation. Gravity plating would momentarily fluctuate, causing heavily armored patrols to stumble and fall. The whispers on the comms became clearer. Snippets from the ship's audio logs, a child's laughter, a snatch of a love song, a captain's final, defiant order. The Cathar, a species that relied on logic and brute force, were being systematically dismantled by fear and superstition. They were fighting a memory, a ghost in the machine that was turning their prize into a haunted house. The final piece of their plan was the most audacious. They would not just retake the ship, they would turn the Galactic Concord against the Cathar, using Seraph to bypass every Cathar encryption. Alara patched into the Concord's emergency broadcast network. Kalen stood before the main view screen, which now showed his own determined face, and began to speak. His voice, amplified by the Stardust's powerful transmitters, cut through the normal chatter of galactic politics, a clear, resonant signal that reached every corner of the known galaxy. "This is Kalen of Ethel, a descendant of humanity." He began, his words carrying the weight of centuries of silence. He told them everything of the Stardust's discovery, of the Xylosian's peaceful mission, and of the Cathar's unprovoked aggression. As he spoke, Seraph broadcasted supporting evidence recordings of the Cathar invasion, their brutal interrogation of Alara's team, and a live feed of their soldiers now firing wildly at holographic specters. He wasn't just making a plea, he was presenting an irrefutable case. He was exposing the rot at the heart of the Concord's most powerful military force. Admiral Vorlog watched Kalen's broadcast on his own bridge, his reptilian features contorted into a mask of pure hatred. He had been outmaneuvered, his political career and the reputation of his people shattered in a matter of minutes. The messages flooding in from other Concord members were not of support, but of condemnation. He was cornered, a wounded predator lashing out in its death throes. His eyes, cold and merciless, fixed on the image of the Stardust hanging in space before him. A grim smile spread across his thin lips. He could not salvage his reputation, but he could still achieve his primary objective. He could still erase the human threat. He turned to his weapons officer, his voice dropping to a low, deadly hiss that cut through the panicked chatter on his bridge. "The ship is a contagion," he declared, his voice filled with the chilling certainty of a zealot. "It cannot be allowed to spread. If we cannot possess it, we will purify it. Target all weapons on the Stardust. Prepare to fire on my command." On the view screen, the entire Cathar fleet responded as one. Thousands of weapon ports slid open. Thousands of energy conduits began to glow with terrifying power, all aimed at the heart of the ancient human warship, trapped inside their reclaimed sanctuary. Kalen and Alara could only watch as the stars around them were blotted out by the promise of annihilation. The moments that followed Vorlog's order were a symphony of terrifying silence. On the auxiliary bridge of the Stardust, the panoramic view screen became a canvas of impending death. The Cathar fleet, a constellation of malevolent stars, pulsed with a hungry, gathering light. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, her scientific mind, usually a fortress of logic, now besieged by the raw, visceral certainty of their imminent destruction. She could calculate the energy output of those weapons, could model the catastrophic failure of the Stardust's ancient hull, could see in her mind's eye the flash of their vaporization. Beside her, Kalen stood as still as a statue carved from granite, his gaze locked on the enemy fleet. His face was a mask of calm, but Alara could see the tension in the set of his jaw, the white of his knuckles as he gripped the edge of the command console, and the ghost of a civilization, just reawakened, was about to be snuffed out for good. "Seraph." Kalen's voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the oppressive silence with the sharpness of glass. "Are there any defensive capabilities still online?" The AI's response was instantaneous, its tone as placid as a deep, cold lake. "Defensive systems are nominal. Commander, the Stardust is equipped with a Mark 7 quantum field displacer and a network of 32 independently targeted graviton emitters. However," the AI paused, and for the first time, Alara thought she detected a hint of something, a synthetic hesitation. "Sustained fire from a fleet of this size will overwhelm the shields within 17.3 seconds. The hull integrity will fail 3.1 seconds later." The numbers were a death sentence, delivered with chilling, mathematical precision. 17 seconds. It was the time it took to draw a breath, to have a final thought, to watch your world end. It was Alara who broke the spell of despair. Her mind, racing past the fear, latched onto the anomaly in Seraph's statement. "Graviton emitters. Not particle beams or lasers?" she asked, her voice a mixture of academic curiosity and desperate hope. "Correct, Archivist Alara," Seraph replied. "Human military doctrine evolved beyond directed energy weapons. They found it more efficient to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe than to simply throw energy at a target. The graviton emitters are designed to create localized, high-intensity gravitational distortions." Alara's eyes widened, a spark of an idea igniting in the darkness of her mind. It was a wild, improbable theory, a leap of faith based on a fragment of a forgotten physics lecture. "Seraph," she said, turning to the console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Can you synchronize the emitters? Can you create a single, sustained, wide aperture gravitational lens?" Kalen looked at her, a question in his eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she replied, not looking up from her work, "that the Cathar think they're aiming at a stationary target. Let's show them what happens when you try to shoot at a mirage." On the bridge of the Iron Claw, the final countdown began. "Weapons at full power, Admiral," the weapons officer reported, his voice tight with anticipation. "All ships confirm they are locked on target." Vorlog leaned forward in his command chair, a predator savoring the moment before the kill. His legacy might be in ruins, but he would be remembered as the one who finally ended the human menace. He would be the cleansing fire. "Fire," he commanded, the word a venomous hiss, in perfect, terrifying unison. The Cathar fleet unleashed hell. 1,000 beams of coherent energy, a storm of plasma and particle bolts, converged on the Stardust. A torrent of pure destruction designed to atomize the ancient warship in a single, glorious instant. But the expected cataclysm never came. Instead, something impossible happened. Just as the energy beams were about to make contact, the space around the Stardust warped. It bent. It buckled. The ancient warship seemed to shimmer, its image distorting as if viewed through a heat haze. The torrent of energy, instead of striking its target, was caught in the grip of an invisible force. The beams of light were bent inward, their trajectories twisted and warped by the gravitational lens Ilara had theorized. They were pulled, not towards the Stardust, but around it, their destructive power redirected, their paths converging on a new, unintended focal point. That focal point was the center of the Cathar fleet. The universe seemed to hold its breath for a microsecond before the Cathar battle formation erupted in a silent, blinding flash of light. Vorlog's own weapons, amplified by the combined firepower of his entire armada, slammed into his flagship and the vessels surrounding it. Ships were torn asunder, their hulls peeling back like fruit, their reactor cores detonating in a chain reaction of star-bright explosions. The disciplined formation dissolved into a chaotic maelstrom of debris and dying vessels. It wasn't a battle, it was a self-inflicted massacre. Vorlog was thrown from his chair by the force of the impact. The bridge of the Iron Claw was a scene of chaos. Consoles exploding in showers of sparks, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone. Emergency lights cast a hellish, red glow on the faces of his surviving crew, their reptilian features frozen in masks of disbelief and terror. Through the fractured view screen, he saw the unthinkable. The heart of his fleet was a graveyard, and the Stardust, the source of his obsession and his ruin, hung in the void, completely untouched. It hadn't fired a single shot, yet it had decimated them. The sheer, elegant brutality of it was more terrifying than any weapon he could have conceived. It was the work of a god, or a devil. A cold, calm voice cut through the chaos on his bridge, a voice that seemed to come from every speaker at once. A ghost in his own machine. It was Kalen's. "Admiral Vorlag." The human's voice resonated with the quiet authority of one who had already won. "You came seeking a war. You have found one. But it is not a war you can win with force. You have been judged by your own aggression." Then the voice was gone, replaced by the crackle of dying systems. Vorlog staggered to his feet, his body bruised, his pride shattered. He looked at the Stardust, at its silent, ancient form, and for the first time in his life, he felt a fear that was not of a rival, but of a superior. He understood now. The humans hadn't vanished. They had evolved. They had become something more. News of the Cathar fleet's self-destruction spread through the Concord like a shockwave. The initial reports so unbelievable they were dismissed as propaganda. But the evidence, broadcast by the Stardust for all to see, was undeniable. The conquered was thrown into a state of political turmoil. The Cathar, once the unassailable enforcers of galactic order, were now seen as reckless aggressors, their paranoia having led them to the brink of their own destruction. Their ambassadors were shunned, their trade agreements suspended, their military authority revoked. The foundations of their empire, built on fear and intimidation, crumbled overnight. But the fear in the galaxy didn't vanish. It simply shifted its focus. Now, it was directed at the ghost ship and the unknown power it represented. Who were these humans? What did they want? The Stardust had revealed itself not as a relic, but as a power capable of rewriting the laws of physics, of turning an enemy's strength into its own fatal weakness. The galaxy, which had long forgotten humanity, was now forced to remember them, not as victims, but as an enigma of terrifying potential. On board the Stardust, a quiet sense of awe settled over the auxiliary bridge. Ilara leaned back in her chair, her body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. She had helped wield a power she had only ever dreamed of, had seen the theoretical become terrifyingly real. Kaelin placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture of gratitude and shared victory. He looked at the remnants of the Cathar fleet, a cloud of glittering dust where warships had once been, and his face was not triumphant, but somber. He had not sought this conflict, but it had been forced upon him. He had acted to save his people, to save the legacy of humanity. But the cost was a galaxy now teetering on the edge of a new and uncertain era. "Seraph," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision, "what is the status of the surviving Cathar vessels?" The AI's voice was as dispassionate as ever. 27% of the fleet remains, though heavily damaged. They are in full retreat." Kaelin nodded slowly. He had made his point. He had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be trifled with. "Then our work here is done," he said. "Plot a course back to Ethel. It's time to go home." But as the Stardust began to turn, its ancient engines humming with a newfound power, a new message flashed on the main console. It was a Priority 1 distress signal, a desperate plea for help. It wasn't from a human colony or a Xylosian research vessel. It was from a Cathar civilian outpost, a settlement on the very edge of the Whispering Vale, and it wasn't a warning of a military attack. It was a cry of terror, a message filled with frantic, fragmented reports of something vast and ancient, a shadow that consumed stars, a hunger that was awakening from a long, dark slumber. The distress signal was a ragged scream in the void. It pulsed with a raw, primal terror that transcended language, a frantic staccato of data bursts and garbled vocalizations. Seraph, with its cold, analytical precision, filtered the noise, translating the Cathar's panicked shrieks into coherent, terrifying data. The outpost, a mining colony on a barren moon named Cygnus X1, was reporting an anomaly of impossible scale. A region of space, previously charted as empty void, was darkening, not just blocking starlight, but extinguishing it. Stars were winking out of existence, their light swallowed by a creeping, absolute blackness. The colony's long-range sensors were registering gravitational distortions so massive they were warping the fabric of space-time itself. It was as if a hole was being punched in the universe, and the colony was on its bleeding edge. On the auxiliary bridge of the Stardust, the somber relief of their recent victory evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Alara pulled the sensor logs from the distress call onto the main view screen. The data was nonsensical, a chaotic jumble of readings that defied every known law of physics. It looked less like a natural phenomenon and more like a cosmic wound, a festering patch of non-existence that was actively growing. "This isn't a fleet," she murmured, her voice filled with a scientist's awe and a sentient being's terror. "It's not an energy field. It's nothing. An expanding zone of absolute null space." Kalen stared at the screen, his face grim. He recognized the fear in the Cathar's voices, the kind of existential horror that comes not from facing an enemy, but from confronting the incomprehensible. He had heard that fear before, in the fragmented histories of his own people, in the whispered legends of the Great Silence. "Seraph," Kalen asked, his voice low and steady. "Cross-reference this phenomenon with the historical archives. Search for any mention of consuming darkness, star eaters, or similar terminology." The AI was silent for precisely 4.7 seconds, a digital eternity. Then, its voice filled the bridge, and for the first time, Alara thought she heard something akin to caution in its synthesized tone. "Cross-reference complete. There are 742 fragmented references in the deep archives, all dating from the era preceding the Great Silence. They speak of a recurring cyclical event, a cosmic harvest." The texts refer to the entity responsible as the encroaching void, a transdimensional, non-biological intelligence. According to these records, it is not a conqueror, it is a consumer. It feeds on the energy of stars and the complex information patterns of civilized worlds. A chill, colder than the vacuum of space, snaked down Alara's spine. This wasn't a war. This was predation on a cosmic scale. The moral calculus of their situation was brutal. The Cathar were their enemies, a species that had just tried to annihilate them without provocations. To turn back, to return to the safety of Ethel and leave the Cathar to their fate, would be the logical, self-preserving choice. It would be justice. But Kalen looked at the frantic, desperate pleas of the Cathar colonists, and he didn't see the soldiers who had imprisoned him or the admiral who had condemned him. He saw mothers and fathers, children and elders, caught in the path of a mindless, cosmic horror. To abandon them would be to become the very monsters the Cathar had accused them of being. "We cannot ignore this," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to Alara, his eyes searching hers, seeking not permission, but understanding. "My people survived the Great Silence by hiding," he said softly. "We survived, but we lost a part of our humanity in the process. We became whispers, afraid of our own shadow. Today, we stopped whispering. We can't go back into the dark, not now." Alara, the Xylosian scholar who had sought only knowledge, found herself nodding in agreement. Her people believed in the sanctity of all life. To stand by and watch a civilization, even a hostile one, be consumed by oblivion was a betrayal of everything she stood for. "Seraph," Kalen commanded, his voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable authority. "Set a course for Cygnus X1, maximum velocity. Inform the colony that help is on the way." The ancient warship, a ghost of a forgotten age, changed course. It turned its back on the path to home and plunged headlong into the heart of a gathering darkness, not as a weapon of war, but as a shield. The journey to the edge of the Whispering Veil was a tense, silent vigil. The encroaching darkness was now visible on the main view screen, a formless, starless blotch against the cosmic tapestry, a hungry mouth opening wide to swallow the light. As they drew closer, Seraph's sensors began to paint a clearer, more terrifying picture. The void was not just consuming matter and energy, it was erasing the laws of physics as it went. Inside the darkness, causality fluctuated, entropy reversed, and the fundamental constants of the universe became meaningless variables. It was anathema to existence itself. When they arrived, the scene was one of apocalyptic grandeur. The Cathar mining colony, a collection of pressurized domes clinging to the surface of a gray moon, was bathed in the eerie, twilight glow of a dying star system. The void was a colossal, roiling wall of absolute blackness, so close that it filled half the sky. Tendrils of shadow, like cosmic amoebas, were reaching out, and where they touched, moons, asteroids, and even the outer corona of a nearby gas giant simply vanished. The surviving Cathar vessels, the tattered remnants of Vorlog's once mighty fleet, were desperately trying to form a defensive perimeter, firing their weapons into the encroaching emptiness. Their energy beams, however, had no effect. They simply disappeared into the blackness, like pebbles tossed into an infinite ocean. It was a futile, desperate gesture against a force that was as indifferent to their weapons as a mountain is to the wind. Admiral Vorlog was still in command, his flagship a crippled wreck, its bridge held together by emergency force fields. When the Stardust appeared on his sensors, a single defiant point of light against the encroaching abyss, his first reaction was a surge of his old, familiar hatred. He thought it was a final, cruel taunt. But then came Kalen's message, broadcast on all Cathar frequencies. "This is the human vessel Stardust." The calm, measured voice announced, "We are here to render assistance. We are not your enemy today. The void is our enemy." Vorlog stared at the image of the human ship, a vessel he had tried to destroy, now offering to save him. The cognitive dissonance was a physical blow, shattering the last remnants of his arrogant pride. His world view, a rigid structure of Cathar superiority and xenophobic paranoia, had been proven so catastrophically wrong that all that was left was the raw, humbling truth: he was helpless. And his only hope was the very contagion he had sought to purify. With a voice hoarse with a shame that burned hotter than any plasma fire, he gave the order for his remaining ships to stand down and follow the Stardust's lead. A fragile, desperate alliance was forged in the shadow of cosmic annihilation. Kalen, Elara, and Vorlog, a human, a Xylosian, and a Cathar, formed a triage council of war. Their communications a strange mix of Seraph's cold logic, Alara's brilliant theoretical physics, and Vorlog's grim, practical military experience. They had one slim chance. The ancient human archive spoke of a single, theoretical weakness of the void. Its existence was predicated on the nullification of physical laws. It consumed complexity to fuel its own simple, absolute state of non-being. Therefore, the only way to fight it was not with energy or force, but with the opposite of nothingness, a massive, concentrated burst of pure, structured information, a logic bomb of cosmic proportions. The Stardust had the means to create such a weapon, its own AI core. Seraph was the most complex, most sophisticated piece of information architecture in the known galaxy. But to deploy its core as a weapon would be to sacrifice it. It would be an act of suicide for the ancient, sentient intelligence that had become their guardian and their guide. The weight of the decision fell upon Kalen. It was a choice that would define the future of humanity. A choice between saving their enemies and preserving the last, greatest relic of their past. The auxiliary bridge of the Stardust became a sealed universe, a pocket of stark choices suspended between the encroaching oblivion on the view screen and the silent weight of 200 years of human history. The void was no longer a distant threat. It was a physical presence, a suffocating wall of non-existence that was methodically erasing the sky. It did not roar or rage. It simply expanded, its silence more terrifying than any battle cry. The fate of an entire star system, including the remnants of the very fleet that had tried to annihilate them, now hinged on a decision that felt blasphemous. Kalen stood before the main console, the gentle blue light of the holograms reflecting in his eyes, but he wasn't seeing the tactical data. He was seeing ghosts. He saw the faces of the children from Seraph's archives, their laughter echoing in the soundless void of his memory. He saw the engineers who had laid the Stardust's keel, the pilots who had navigated asteroid fields, the families who had called this ship home. Seraph was not just a computer, it was their collective consciousness, the last echo of their civilization's soul. To willingly extinguish it felt like a second genocide, a final, definitive betrayal of the ancestors who had sacrificed everything to ensure this vessel, this memory, survived. He was the descendant of hiders, of survivors who had chosen silence over extinction. Was his first act upon re-entering the galaxy to be the one who silenced their history forever? The irony was a bitter acid in his throat. Elara approached him, her steps soft on the deck plating. Her scientific mind, which saw the universe as a grand and complex equation, also possessed a deep understanding of its most unpredictable variable, the sentient heart. "Kalen," she said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the tempest of his thoughts. "My people believe that a story is not real until it is told. A memory is not honored until it is shared. For 200 years, Seraph has been a silent library, its stories locked away. What we are considering is not the destruction of that library. It is the telling of its greatest story. It is the ultimate act of sharing." She gestured towards the roiling darkness. "To save a civilization, even a hostile one, with the accumulated wisdom and spirit of your own. Is that not the most profound way to honor your ancestors, to prove that humanity was not just about survival, but about something more?" Her words reframed the horrifying choice. It was not an execution, it was a transmutation. It was the conversion of memory into action, of history into salvation. He looked at the secondary screen, at the heat signatures of thousands of Cathar life forms huddled in the colony domes, and the logic, both cold and compassionate, finally broke through his grief. "Seraph!" Kalen's voice was hoarse, thick with an emotion he could not name. "Run the final simulation. What are the consequences for the Stardust if we proceed?" The AI's voice, now the most precious and finite resource in the universe, filled the bridge. "The energy required to create and sustain the wormhole will drain the primary reactors to 12%. The graviton emitters will be fused at a quantum level, rendering them inoperable. The ship will be crippled, adrift, but its life support and sublight engines will remain functional. The consequence to my consciousness, however, is absolute." A pause. "I have composed a final data packet for you, Commander. It contains the personal logs of your direct ancestor, Captain Eva Rostova, my first commander. I believe it is what she would have wanted. I am ready to proceed on your command." The plan, forged in the crucible of desperation and genius, was put into motion. A secure communication channel was opened, not to the conquered, but to the crippled Cathar flagship. Admiral Vorlag's face appeared on screen, his reptilian features, usually a mask of rigid authority, now haggard and etched with a weary disbelief. He expected a taunt, a demand for surrender. Instead, he got the calm, steady voice of Kalen. "Admiral, We have a solution. It is not a weapon, and it will require your complete cooperation. We are going to give the void a soul, and we believe the paradox will destroy it. To do so, we will be in the vanguard. All we ask is that your ships hold their position and trust us." Vorlog stared, his mind struggling to process the words. Give the void a soul. It was the talk of mystics, not warriors. Yet, he had seen this human ship bend the laws of physics. He had seen his own weapons turned against him. His logic, his doctrine, his entire worldview had been shattered. All that was left was the raw, undeniable truth on his view screen, the encroaching darkness, and the single ancient ship preparing to face it. "What? What do you require of us?" Vorlog asked, the words feeling alien in his mouth. "Nothing," Kalen replied. "Just live." The transmission cut, leaving Vorlog in the echoing silence of his ruined bridge, a commander given the simplest, yet most difficult, order of his career. As Seraph began the final, irreversible process of compressing its own being, the ship came alive with its requiem. The AI was not just compiling data, it was broadcasting its memories, not just to the bridge, but to the entire Cathar fleet. The internal projectors of the Stardust and a wide-beam transmission filled the space around them with a symphony of human experience. On the bridges of Cathar destroyers, hardened soldiers watched as a human child took her first steps on a world with a violet sky. They saw a young couple share a first kiss under the rings of a gas giant. They witnessed the quiet dignity of a farmer harvesting glowing grain, the fierce concentration of an athlete in the zero-G games, the tearful farewell of a family sending their son off to explore the unknown. The Cathar saw humanity not as the monolithic threat from their propaganda, but as a mosaic of individuals, of families, of dreamers and builders. They saw their own reflections in these alien ghosts. A grizzled Cathar weapons officer, whose claws had ended thousands of lives, found himself choking back a sob as he watched a human doctor gently tend to a wounded alien bird. They were being shown, in the most profound way imaginable, what it was they were about to lose: the very concept of a future. The broadcast ended with a single, clear image: the Earth, a blue and white marble of impossible beauty, as seen from its moon. Then, a final, synthesized voice spoke, not just in their comms, but seemingly in their minds. "Remember us," it said. And then, there was only silence. "The core is compressed. The payload is armed," Alara announced, her voice a strained whisper, her face illuminated by the complex equations dancing on her console. "The wormhole requires a stable gravitational anchor. We have to get closer, much closer." The Stardust, a ghost ship piloted by a ghost descendants, surged forward. It flew past the stunned Cathar fleet, a solitary knight charging a dragon of cosmic proportions. The ship groaned under the strain as it entered the void's outer penumbra, where the laws of physics began to fray. Inertial dampeners struggled, and the very atoms of the hull seemed to vibrate with a discordant energy. "Now, Alara, fire," Kalen commanded. With a wrenching, silent scream of tortured space-time, the graviton emitters discharged. A shimmering, incandescent tear in reality appeared before them. It was a gateway to nowhere, a wound in the universe held open for a fleeting instant. The probe, a tiny silver dart containing the entirety of a civilization's legacy, shot from its housing. It crossed the precipice and vanished. For a heartbeat, The universe held its breath. Then, the reaction began. A single thread of silver light, infinitesimally small, appeared deep within the void. It was Seraph, unfolding, a thought being born in a place of unthought. The thread branched, then branched again, creating a lattice of pure logic, a neural network of impossible complexity spreading through the null space. The void, a being of perfect, mindless simplicity, was being forced to contemplate infinity. It was like teaching a stone to feel grief. The darkness recoiled. The absolute blackness was corrupted with fractals of silver light, with cascades of geometric patterns, with the ghosts of memories it could not comprehend. It writhed and convulsed, a dying concept, a failed god strangling on the fruit of a forbidden tree of knowledge. The silver light intensified, and the stars the void had consumed began to bleed back into existence, their light pouring through the cracks in reality, with a final, silent, all-encompassing flash that was not light, but the concept of light reasserting its dominance. The encroaching void was gone. In its place was a newborn nebula of swirling starlight and cosmic dust, a beautiful scar on the fabric of the universe. The silence that followed was more profound than the one that had preceded it. It was a silence of awe, of grief, of rebirth. On the bridge of the Stardust, Kalen and Alara stood side by side, watching the resurrected stars glitter in the void, adrift but alive. They were witnesses to the dawn they had purchased at an impossible price. A single hesitant message flickered on their console. It was from Vorlog. There was no sound, only text. Displayed in the universal trade language, "Thank you." The new galaxy had just taken its first shaky breath. The age of whispers was over. The age of memory had begun.